Are you passionate about foreign policy, national security, and the latest in domestic politics? Consider becoming a member of the DSR Network, your go-to source for in-depth analysis and insightful discussions. With the DSR Network podcasts, stay ahead of the curve on global affairs. Each episode features top experts, policymakers, and thought leaders who break down complex issues into digestible, engaging conversations. From breaking news to historical context, we cover the topics that matter most. Whether it's the intricacies of international diplomacy, the latest in national security strategies, or the dynamics of U.S. politics, the DSR Network has you covered. Members receive an ad-free listening experience, bonus content for virtually all of our shows, an invitation to join the DSR Slack community, enhanced show notes for select podcasts, and much more. Visit thedsrnetwork.com/buy and enter code GRADUATE to receive 30% off the regular membership price for the first year or first month. That's thedsrnetwork.com/buy and code GRADUATE. Thank you very much for your support.
This is the Daily Blast from the New Republic, produced and presented by the DSR Network. I'm your host, Greg Sargent. This week, Donald Trump erupted at Fox News not once, but twice. He raged over a Fox News poll that found President Biden leading Trump nationally, and lashed out at the network for featuring a guest who was critical of him. This is an occasion to revisit one of this podcast's favorite topics, the centrality of sheer grift to the Trump MAGA project. Trump regularly rages at Fox when it doesn't read from his precise script, which is remarkable given that Fox is usually fully committed to deceiving its viewers on his behalf. But both Trump and Fox draw on a long history in which grift and scams have been deeply intertwined with the American right for over half a century. And today we're discussing this with the perfect guest, journalist Joe Conason, author of a new book called The Longest Con: How Grifters, Swindlers, and Frauds Hijacked American Conservatism. Great to have you on, Joe.
Good to be with you, Greg.
So a Fox poll found Biden up nationally 50 to 48%, and Trump erupted claiming, quote, "Fox News polls are always the worst for me and always will be." Also, former House Speaker Paul Ryan said on Fox that Trump's unfit for the presidency and caused years of GOP election losses, which is just true. But Trump raged that nobody can ever trust Fox as long as Ryan is on its board. Okay, Joe, Fox has been lying for Trump for years, pushing all kinds of propaganda about January 6th and his criminal trials and convictions. Can you tell us a little bit about Fox News' role in the history of the right? And is Fox's lying for Trump the network's most sustained deception in its history?
Well, it was certainly the most expensive deception in its history. It cost them, somewhere around $750 million or more because of the lies that were promoted by the network about the 2020 election and the alleged and absolutely non-existent fraud in that election. So that was a sort of a high watermark of Fox's, support of this grifter. But its history goes back much further to the mid-'90s when the network was founded by Rupert Murdoch, my old boss from the Village Voice, and Roger Ailes, who's somebody I wrote about for the New Republic back when he was the secret instigator of the so-called Willie Horton ad, a notorious racist advertisement that was used in the 1988 presidential campaign by the Bush campaign. Ailes was very close to Bush. He was a Republican operative, but also a very skilled television technician, really a creator of television, and somebody who had no journalistic values, but had great skills in how to present TV to people, how to get them to watch it, what would be persuasive to them. And Murdoch, very cleverly brought Ailes in to put together a news channel that would be a propaganda network, which they started out by calling fair and balanced because it's a very Murdochian way of saying the opposite of what is true about what you're doing. That's what they did. And so Trump, fit perfectly into that matrix. I don't know that Ailes ever liked Trump very much. I think he probably looked down on him. I've heard. I know both of them. I knew Roger, and I used to know Trump. I think Roger probably thought that Trump was intellectually inferior and, not a very impressive person and probably a bit too much of a blowhard. But nevertheless, he, like Roger Stone and others on the right, knew that Trump could be sold. And that's the essence of the grift, is what you can sell. What you can sell to people in terms of ideology, what you can sell in terms of their hatred, their paranoia, their fear, and, monetizing that. Roger Stone once said to me, and he said it publicly too, hate is much more powerful in politics than love. And they believe that firmly, many of them, most of them, and that's what they have acted on ever since. So when you see Trump raging about, Paul Ryan, who is pretty right-wing, it's because that's the mode that they're always in. They're always in the mode of finding the object of hate, finding the object of scorn. And it doesn't really matter to Trump whether it's a Republican or a Democrat.
Yeah, I mean, Joe, let me clarify for people that the $750 million that Fox News lost was due to the Dominion lawsuit against Fox for libeling them in the course of lying about January 6th.
That's correct.
And it's worth noting that Fox is really important to Trump's grift in a sense, because in late 2020, Fox went all in on the big lie of a stolen election, and that is what cost them the money, but they kept it up since. Fox has relentlessly smeared the prosecutions of Trump, creating the myth that he's a martyred victim getting railroaded. And look, having millions believe this surely helps Trump raise huge money from supporters, which he can then divert into legal fees without angering them. They think it's going to a good cause. Now, I want to ask you about your book. It has some great detail about how the big lie showed immediate fundraising potential right after the 2020 election and then kind of became this unbelievable fundraising juggernaut. Can you talk about that and also how the grift money machine, I should say, works in the context of his prosecutions?
Well, so Jared Kushner kept the Trump fundraising machine going after the election. They knew they were going to do that in one form or another because it was so profitable. But the stop the steal, the whole mythology about the election proved to be a tremendous moneymaker for them. They booked, I think, more than $250 million in the first few months of that alone. And it was the Trump fundraising operation internally was called T-Magic. It was an acronym, but that was how it was referred to as T-Magic. And it really was. And Kushner, they used, in conjunction with the Republican National Committee, by the way, they used incredibly deceptive advertising online in their emails, all the rest, to get people to send money, to the extent that there were people in the Republican National Committee, and I have to say this is unusual, who objected to these lies. And one poor guy got fired for not wanting to put some outrageous lie in an email that they were sending out. But this is why in The Longest Con, I have a chapter that's called, the big lie, is the big lie the biggest grift? After, at the end of a book, basically, that describes many, many grifts over the years, dating back to the 1950s and Roy Cohn, his role in the McCarthy Committee, but who was, as you know, Trump's mentor in all of this. They have made a lot of money from this. And I think one of the things that probably angers Trump, Greg, when he sees polls that show him losing to Joe Biden is, there's a risk of prison for him if he loses the election. But there's also a risk that his grift goes away. I mean, if if he loses this election, then the idea that he somehow won the last one and it was stolen from him, that becomes much less plausible to the average, sucker out there who might send money in. So he's angry right now, not just because of the Fox News poll, but because today, 538, which aggregates polls, showed Joe Biden ahead for the first time this year. So it's not just Fox News. The election appears to be turning now. People feel better about the economy in some of these polls as well. And I think that must be driving Trump around the bend, even further than he was already.
Well, let's dig into your book. There's a darker aspect to all this, and this is what I think is a major through line to all the grift. Racial demagoguery, or should I say racism, is central to Trump's biggest scam, the big lie, the biggest grift, as you say, because it turns on the idea of rampant vote fraud in urban centers and among supposedly voting undocumented immigrants. And, as your book shows, the intertwining of racism and grift goes back at least to the 1960s and Barry Goldwater, who ran for president in 1964. Can you talk about that a bit and take us through Richard Viguerie and George Wallace? I mean, there's that through line all through it.
Yeah, you're right. Racial, I guess I would call racial paranoia is the way I would characterize it as a form of grifting, because what they do is to stir up people's fears and then get them to send money in order to supposedly, suppress the whatever it is that's making them scared, in usually civil rights. And so this began not even in the 60s, but in the 50s, with racists like Billy James Hargis, who I profile in the book, who was one of the original, direct mail fundraising guys. He was a fundamentalist minister who was on the radio. He hooked up with a sacked general named Edwin Walker, who led a riot at Ole Miss when they tried to integrate that campus with the National Guard. And that was a fundamental part. That was 1961. That was a fundamental part of their appeal. They would hold big barnstorming tours across the South and pass the hat and make what would now be millions of dollars by stirring up people's fear, anger, and behaving as if they had some way of addressing, the social problems that were supposedly making people so upset. Now, the Goldwater campaign, as you and your listeners may know, succeeded only in the old Confederacy. Basically, there was no other states that supported Barry Goldwater in the 1964 election, except the states of the old Confederacy. And the reason was that he had questioned the Civil Rights Act. He was against it, at least in those years, and anti-civil rights, supposedly on libertarian grounds, but that didn't stop racists from rallying around him. And when his campaign was over, he had created what was the most important list of American right-wing voters that had existed to date. There had never been anything like it. The people who had donated to his campaign. That list was sitting in Congress, in the Capitol, in the custody of the Clerk of the House. And Richard Viguerie, who had been a fundraiser for various minor right-wing outfits up until then, had this brainstorm. I'm going to send a group of secretaries, women of course, to the Clerk of the House office to copy down all of the names. And then I'll have a name that I could really raise a list that I could really raise a lot of money from. And that's what he did. And and he then put those names on magnetic tape and set them up in, early computer systems that could be used to send direct mail to people. And it was a gold mine. I mean, it was, it spawned a huge industry that now dominates politics in America. Low level donors who give because of, their ideological commitments in the kind of polarization that we have are very important to both sides. But on the right, they built the American right with their money, and a lot of it was obtained from them under false pretenses, as I show in the book.
So Trump, through the 70s and the 80s, is, rising up in New York City, and he's figuring out how to, play the tabloids and rally masses behind him with other forms of racial demagoguery, right? You could walk us through that if you can, and then that takes us up to, again, another racist grift, which is birtherism. Can you walk us through how Trump kind of emerges from that world and kind of picks up the baton from the previous generation of grifters?
Well, he was adjacent to the world of racism, racist media in New York, especially the New York Post. He was a favorite of the Post, Murdoch, and so forth. But I don't know. His expressions of racism mostly came later in the Central Park Five case. But there was no doubt that he himself was a practicing racist in the way that he ran his company. He had been sued for it and defended by Roy Cohn, of course, sued by the federal government over discrimination in the apartment buildings that he and his father operated. It was later that the racism came to the fore, and then, of course, he sort of ran to the front of the parade on birtherism, which had been pioneered, let's say, by some other grifters, but he took that over pretty quickly, and the reason that he came to the fore so swiftly, Greg, was that some longtime grifters, principally Roger Stone, who had worked for Trump as a lobbyist, saw Trump as the next big thing in right-wing politics. He saw that Trump could be marketed. And Stone, as I explained in the book, had been involved for a long time. He was actually, a sort of low-level dirty trickster in the Nixon campaign, came to the attention of Watergate prosecutors who didn't really find anything to nail him on. So he skipped away from that. But he had been involved in a major right-wing grift called NCPAC, the National Conservative Political Action Committee, which was an extension of what Viguerie had been doing. He had learned from Viguerie, Richard Viguerie, even his then wife had learned from Viguerie and set up a phony PAC that I talked about in the book a little bit. But it was NCPAC that where Roger Stone got his kind of start. Then, he became involved in the Reagan campaign, was helping to run the Reagan campaign in the Northeast in 1980 when Reagan won the presidency. And that was when he met Trump. Roy Cohn, who was a friend of Reagan and Trump's lawyer, introduced Roger to Trump, and that was how their partnership really began. Trump raised quite a bit of money for Reagan, and Stone sort of rose in the right-wing world in part because of that.
Well, let's talk about this ability to see what can be sold. So after Mitt Romney got beaten soundly by Barack Obama in the 2012 election, the Republican Party is thinking to itself, there's this rising new coalition of young people, non-whites, and educated professionals, suburbanites. We're fucked. Demographically, we're fucked. We gotta figure this out. So they do an autopsy. They decide that they need to moderate on immigration. And in comes this guy who says, no. That's not what the Republican base wants to hear. They want to hear that Barack Obama is an imposter from Kenya, right? So Trump recognized what the right-wing base wanted to buy, right? Isn't that what happened? And here you see this through line really kind of very clearly.
Well, I would say Stone recognized it and that he kind of recruited Trump to his vision of what Trump could do. But Trump didn't disagree with it. I mean, Trump certainly found it congenial. He had to give to Democrats and, have decent relations with Democrats operating in New York and New York City and state. But his dad was, apparently busted at a Klan rally in the 30s, and they had no great love for liberal politics, to say the least. So Trump was very comfortable with this right-wing approach. Before Trump, they had one hope in the post-Romney period, which was Sarah Palin, you may recall, in the Tea Party. And I go into the Tea Party grift in some detail, which is kind of amazing. What a just ridiculous scamming operation that turned out to be.
It's an extremely important part of the story, for sure.
But a very important part of the story. And the only reason that there was a space for Trump to come up was that Sarah Palin was, non compos mentis. There was nothing there, intellectually or almost mentally. And as her former campaign managers will tell you from the McCain campaign. Therefore, there was this vacuum for Trump because the Republican Party was not going to reform and become a party of the center. That was just whatever their consultants told them after studying the debacle of 2012 and so forth. That was just, they couldn't do that because there is a hardcore within the Republican Party that has been there for forever, basically, going back to isolationism in the 1930s, that is very right-wing. And it's a significant part of the party. It may be, a quarter, it may be a third, and at this point, it's probably more than half. And you can't really reform the party around that core. So they didn't have those choices in front of them. So the choice that they did have was a Trump, Roger Stone, Nick Pack, really pretty right-wing direction. And that's where they went.
Worth recalling, I think, that birtherism was a pretty key idea among the Tea Party. So as you say, this is not Trump who came up with it, obviously. It was bubbling around, but he picked it up with great gusto. And let's remember that he then went and gave the speech about Mexicans raping Americans. And he understood what the base wanted to hear. That was almost like when he gave that speech, it was a way of tearing up the Republican autopsy on national television.
Well, that's correct. I mean, I think one of the reasons he disliked Barack Obama so much, there were two reasons. Barack Obama's black, and Barack Obama's superior to him in every conceivable respect, as a human being. And I'm not going to mince any words about that. It's just true. Barack Obama didn't inherit anything. Barack Obama is, he's smarter, he's better looking, he's accomplished a lot more, and he's just, and people like him better. So it's.
Yes, but Joe, he hasn't made as much money, has he?
Well, Trump hasn't made any money. If you actually calculate what Trump would have if he'd put his inheritance into CDs, he'd have more now, rather than wasting it on the Trump shuttle and the Trump steaks and all the other stupid things that he did. But be that as it may, Barack Obama has plenty of money and that he earned honestly, and has never committed a crime. So for Trump, Barack Obama is just an intolerable person. He's somebody who he cannot stand from the very beginning. And then to make it worse, Barack Obama made fun of him because, in retaliation for the birther nonsense, but nevertheless, he publicly humiliated him at the White House Correspondents' Dinner. God, I wish I'd been at that one. And, it's been swords crossed ever since for them. But I think race really is at the bottom of it. It's one thing to feel, for someone like Trump, to feel inferior to a white man. That's very bad. He can't really stand that either. But to be so clearly outclassed by a black man is, it's impossible for him.
So let's bring this full circle back to where we started. I think it's worth reminding everyone that Fox News got crosswise of Trump and MAGA when Fox called Arizona for Biden in 2020, and correctly, it turned out. Now, that cost Fox a lot of viewers. We learned that from the discovery process in the Dominion lawsuit. Some Fox personalities were expressly angry about the calling of Arizona because they worried that it would lose the audience, and it did. And since then, Fox has gotten the message, right? I mean, they have figured out that what the base wants is the big lie, and now what the base wants is the prosecutions are all corrupt. The deep state is out to get Trump. Trump's a martyr. So can you wrap this all up for us? I mean, here you have Fox, which has been a major player in the longest con, right? And Trump kind of trying to figure out in this weird dance where most of the time they're essentially really kind of deceiving the MAGA masses together, and right, but occasionally they kind of fall out with each other. What does it all add up to?
Well, I mean, I would say the same thing about Trump and Rupert Murdoch that I said about Ailes, basically. Rupert Murdoch went to Oxford. He's not an idiot. And he, I'm sure, disdains Trump on some level as an uncultured, boob who, can be turned around in circles by advisors who he shouldn't listen to. I mean, I just think Murdoch thinks he's an ill-advised, dumb person. Nevertheless, very, very powerful and somebody you have to reckon with. And Murdoch has found ways to do that on Fox, sometimes against his own better judgment. Now, Fox has a competitor, Newsmax, which is about to go public. I mean, there's actually a real competitor. It's much smaller than Fox still, but it exists, and nobody thought it would get anywhere. And the reason it got somewhere is precisely because of the episode that you described beginning in Arizona in 2020, when Fox called that election correctly. They allowed journalism to occur on their air, and they paid the price. So now, I think they're increasingly backed into this corner of going along with whatever Trump wants, which is the story of the whole Republican Party. There is not much of a difference or a distinction between Fox News and the Republican Party as institutions. Fox, really, someone like Sean Hannity, has huge influence over what occurs in the Republican Party. And Hannity and most of the Fox people, other than Paul Ryan, I guess, are wholly owned by Donald Trump. They dare not displease him. And the same is obviously true of the party, which now you see, Republican Party elected officials who Trump had dispatched a mob that was ready to actually kill them to Capitol Hill on January 6th, coming around and saying, he's the greatest president ever. That is, cognitive dissonance on a very high level.
And those people who wanted to kill us, well, they were just there for a tourist visit.
Yes. I mean, these are people who ran away and hid, and they know that what they're saying is just the enormous, absurd lie that everybody can see through. But within the Republican Party, there's a base of people who accept this stuff. And that's who they fear, along with Trump himself. And they're going to play along with it to the bitter end. I personally don't think it's going to work out well for them in this election or in the future. I think it's unsustainable, a lie at that level. But, the truth is, in world history, we've seen terrible consequences from that kind of thing in the past. It's not impossible that something like that would happen here.
Joe Conason, thanks so much for coming on with us today. Everybody, check out Joe's book. It's highly entertaining and very informative, both about the history of the right and about the present. Thanks so much, Joe.
It was really my pleasure, Greg. We'll see you.
Folks, our new issue all about liberalism is now up online. Please definitely check it out. It's packed with essays from people like Michael Tomasky, who writes on liberalism's natural disadvantage and how to overcome it, to Sam Adler-Bell, who critiques liberalism from the left, and Danielle Allen, who writes about the need for a kind of power-sharing liberalism that leads us to true freedom. We'll see you all Monday. You've been listening to The Daily Blast with me, your host, Greg Sargent. The Daily Blast is a New Republic podcast and is produced by Riley Fessler and the DSR Network.